Here's some tricks for learning bar chords. So I've gotten a lot of requests for this, and it's kind of a hard thing to explain. A lot of times I just kind of grab my students' fingers and move them around when I'm teaching. So I mean, the first thing when you're learning bar chords is, the first thing you should know is there's 4 different shapes. There's this kind. It's a major shape with your middle fingers there, and then there's a minor shape that almost looks the same. Then there's this one, which is the most awkward, I think. But you have to lay, like, this one's barring 2 notes. It's barring up there, actually, and then then you gotta hold that down and then bar 3 notes with that finger. And then there's this one, which is the easiest bar chord. So really, like, the trick for this one is a little different than for the others. So I think if you can actually learn this minor bar chord, this is a pretty hard one to get down, so I would focus on maybe learning this one first, and the common spot to do it is A minor. So like the way I would get my students to do this is start out with a power chord, so do 5 7 7 like that. So first thing, you should just make sure before you do bar chords that you can do a power chord. So 5 7 7. And the trick is with that is make sure these fingers are together and smashed up like this. So you got 5 7 7, and then you want to lay this finger on all 3 notes and see if you can go like this. What happens to a lot of people is they'll get the power chord, but then the rest will sound like it won't be ringing out, and that's just because you got to push really hard. So you want to put your middle finger on top. That will help, and push really hard. But the other thing is, like a lot of my students do, is they don't know where to put their thumb, so a lot of them will put their thumb up too high. Because sometimes when you're playing guitar, you want your thumb up high, like right here. Like you don't have to, but like on the G chord, sometimes it's easier to keep your thumb up high. Or like right here on C or D. So when you switch down here to a bar chord, you definitely gotta put your thumb lower. So on the back of the neck, it ends up being like around there. See where my thumb is? So oops, so A minor. Just make sure your thumb is low. My thumb is also either, let me try to do this naturally. My thumb is actually here, it's actually right behind this finger. But some people like to put their thumb kind of in between those fingers, or I've even seen some people try to put it over here. I think this is a bad habit to put your thumb on this side. So I usually, like right now, my thumb is just kind of a little bit above the middle of the neck, right behind this finger. Then one other problem, aside from having their thumb up too high, that I see with my students is they try to put their finger flat, like they're trying to push flat on the strings. If you notice, my finger kind of has like a little tiny bit of a curve to it, and like a lot of times I'll show my students I have all these lines, like I do have lines right there from pushing. You also, like, I kind of have a callus like on the side of my finger right here from doing bar chords. So you kind of start to build up like a callus right here, because you kind of, your finger has a slight curve to it, and it kind of rolls on its side a tiny bit. It's kind of on like, it's not flat like that, it's kind of rolled on its side. And once you figure that out, it makes bar chords and power chords a lot easier. See, like both my fingers are kind of rolled on their side a tiny bit. So that's definitely another trick. So don't try to keep your, like when you're pushing, don't try to keep your finger like perfectly flat and pushing down. It's got to be a little more rolled on its side. So once you can do that chord, then the next one is easy, because then you've already figured out how to bar here. So then just put your middle finger on the 6th fret on the G string. And this is much easier because here you do like the same thing. Middle finger just needs to be on its tip. And this only has to hit the top 2 now, the top 2 strings. So you don't have to push nearly as hard. That's why I would say learn this first, this A minor. Then switch to A major. So this one shouldn't be too hard if you could do the minor chord, and then if you can do this one, just move it up. Move this entire shape up so it becomes 5, 7, 7, 6, 5. This is D minor. And this is even easier because if you could do this, when you're up here, you're only barring the very top note. So this should be a pretty easy chord. So at this point, if you worked on this one, make sure your thumb's in the right place, make sure you roll on the side of your finger. You can check it like. And one other thing that can happen sometimes is, you hear that? I'm pushing pretty hard right now. If I push really hard, I can kind of get it to ring out, but I'm getting some rattle. So one other thing sometimes too, like if I'm doing A minor, notice I actually couldn't bar like right there. I had to move my finger up. And the reason why is to get the string to ring out. Like sometimes you have like a little crease depending on how long your fingers are or where these creases are. And they kind of line up with the string. So sometimes you also have to adjust where your finger goes. Like if my finger is right there, like I'd be playing with the tip of my finger on this note A. This note doesn't even ring out, and this is actually the most critical note to make it a minor chord. So notice I have to bar, like over bar it. On the major chord I don't have to do it as much, so the minor chord, you just, for me, that's how I have to do it, because if I do it straight up like that, it doesn't work out. So then, after you can do that, then you can do the major, and then you move it up and get the minor. And the reason why this is major and this is minor, because that can be confusing, is because of the tuning of the guitar. Because the tuning of the guitar is like in fourths as you go up, but then right here from G to B, it's actually tuned in a third. Like this is a major chord, this is a major interval, and these are perfect fourths. And this is major. Fourth again, so when you move it up, what happens is the same shape, when you move the shape up to here, is actually different in terms of the relationships between the notes. So that's why like things like if you take a power chord and you move it up, right there it stretches out temporarily. See, only right there it stretched out. Power chord, these are all power chords. So you do minor, major, move it up, D minor. Then the last one is this one. This is the hardest, definitely the hardest bar chord to learn how to do. And normally when I teach this one to my students, I don't worry about them getting this top note to ring out, because a lot of times you actually don't want this to ring out. So you end up just strumming up to here. When if I were you, like when you first learn this chord, don't worry about getting this note to ring out. So what you want to do is just worry about getting this note down, and then the hard part is figuring out how to get this finger to lay on 3 notes at the same time. And again, make sure your thumb isn't up high, because it will make this a lot more awkward. So make sure your thumb is sort of in the same spot. Sometimes I think a little even lower for this one. So it's a little bit hard to show that, but like right there. And the other thing you want to do when you're first trying to learn this one is make sure the tip of this finger is touching the string. See, I'm muting it. That's a really good habit to start right from the beginning. So make sure you can't hear that. Then also another thing my students do a lot when they learn this chord is this finger comes down onto this string. And it sounds really wrong, but if you're a beginner and you're just learning, you might not notice it. So make sure that it gets onto the string up on the D string. And then just start strumming it. And then always check your bar chords like. So this is muted, because this is a really good habit to get into for this one. Same thing for this one. Make sure you're muting that. And notice my finger is kind of going like, hey, it's kind of bending like that. So some people's fingers, it's weird, like they're like double jointed, so their finger will bend a ton, and some people's fingers can barely bend. So you just gotta experiment. Everyone's fingers are a little different lengths. And one other thing you want to make sure you don't do is this. Sometimes I have students who will push really hard, which is rare, but they'll get this top note right here to ring out. Now you're playing a major 6 chord, and that just doesn't sound right. So make sure your finger doesn't go there and grabbing the wrong bass note, and make sure it's not up there. And once you can do that, then you can really try to get this, you can try to figure out how to get this top note to ring out also. See, I'm actually barring, this finger now is barring up to there. And it just takes a lot of experimentation, but the main thing is getting that finger to bend enough so that it's like pushing these 3 notes and lifting up. It's lifting up above this string. Like, it's kind of hard to describe it, but I don't even know if I can show it. But this finger is just kind of, so you can see there's some curve to that finger, this one. Just all that experimentation to get that note to ring out. But the truth is, like, this chord, like, a lot of times you do need to get that note to ring out. For some songs, you'll be like there was a Metallica song that I just did a lesson for, and I went, like in that case, you would need that bar chord, though. So, whoops, one more time. So see right there, like, you need that, because what's happening on top is that. But a lot of times what I'll do is like if I'll simplify that chord because I don't like this shape, so I'll do it like this. What I'm doing is muting the D string and just playing basically these 3 notes. So then it's not really a bar. It's a little easier. Like even that Metallica song, I might go. Or I'll do it like this with muting up the G string. So you could go. But there, actually, see, we need that note. But sometimes we'll be like. So sometimes there's ways to get around it, or you could do the chord like this. If you don't need the bass, or just the top of it, or the middle of it. So this chord is definitely a hard one, and what I'm saying is there's a lot of ways to avoid it, unless you really need the bar chord. And another thing you'll see with this shape, a lot of people play an inversion of it. Like, instead of that, we'll do it like this. Like that. So sometimes you'll see that version instead. So the other thing is, like, if you have small hands, the first thing I would recommend, like for anybody who's learning this and you're having problems and you think it might be because of your guitar, definitely go try some other guitars. Like if you have really small hands and you're playing on a guitar that's too big for you, it's going to be tough. But the thing that I actually started doing with my students is putting electric guitar strings on their guitar for the ones who were trying to do, and a lot of them are young and they have small hands and they just don't know how to push that hard, like, because you do have to push pretty hard to get it to sound clean. So what I would do is, even if they had an acoustic guitar, we would take off the strings, like the first couple months they were playing, and put on like 10 gauge electric strings. So then it's much easier to push down. And I was able to get really good results with bar chords, like really fast doing that change alone. And then later they would kind of know the right technique because they could experiment and didn't hurt their fingers as bad. But like, let's say your hands are just too small for the guitar, like you weren't really able to, like I said here, I need to overbar, and your fingers just weren't big enough to do that. Well, you might need a smaller guitar. Like I've taught some women, and they get 3/4 size guitars that are adults, just because a full size guitar would be too big. So that's an option. But yeah, you just gotta experiment, because everyone's fingers are a little different. Like one of my friends, his fingers are like super long. If he said like this chord, he can't do it, because his finger always does this. So I don't know, like I think he just doesn't play this chord. I just think he can't do this one, so he doesn't do it. And I've taught some people with really fat fingers, like their fingers are just like double my finger size, like the tip, just super fat. In that case, like it makes it harder to play chords like this, because like one finger will mute out some strings, so it'll be like. So in that case, I mean, you might need to get a bigger guitar, or just make adjustments based on your fingers. So, so yeah, that's basically it. And once you like learn these bar chords, these basic ones, like learning chords like this. This is a pretty common one. This is a 9 chord. It'll all be easier by that point. So I wouldn't learn any harder sorts of shapes, like until you can. I wouldn't worry about any of that stuff until you really are comfortable with these basic bar chords. And one of the best musicians I've found to learn bar chords is Jack Johnson, because he does a lot of cool stuff with bar chords, and most of his songs use them, so it kind of forces you to learn them well. So a lot of my students, the musician that really I felt like got them over the top with bar chords was learning Jack Johnson songs. So that's about it. If anyone has any questions about this, let me know. Bye.